All right, let's go ahead and call the workshop to order. I'll ask everybody to find their seats. Okay, good afternoon. This is the workshop for the Lee County Board of County Commissioners on our flood mitigation plan. It's November 10th, 2020, and I got 1:32 is the time. Let's go ahead and ask our county manager to kick things off with a few comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This workshop today is based on the culmination of an awful lot of work that's been done since 2017, since Irma, since the rain event 10 days prior to Irma, where we received 30 inches of rain over a 10-day period, depending on where you were in the county. And if you recall, if you managed to get in one of the flyovers after Hurricane Irma, Lee County looked like a lake. I mean, you couldn't find some of the landmarks, and you weren't always sure exactly where you were. Following all of that, we had several workshops on flooding, and the commission gave us pretty specific instructions that started with, all right, you guys, go figure out how to fix it. And that was kind of all we needed to know. So, as you know, we hired a number of engineers, and we have gone through phase 1 and phase 2. We're getting ready to get into phase 3 of this program. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave Harner, Mr. Chair, if that's okay, and ask him to get this really set up nicely for us, and then we'll have Roland go through the presentation, and you can see what work has been done and what's contemplated.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. As Roger said, following the 2017 storm events, we had Hurricane Irma and we had Invest 92L. They put anywhere from 15 to 31 inches of rain, depending, again, as Roger said, where you were in the county. And part of the direction that you gave us was to look at ways how we're going to mitigate the flooding in Lee County. And work with our partners, work with the municipalities, work with South Florida Water Management, LAMCID, all those groups, how we're going to work collectively to look at it globally, how we're going to help mitigate this issue. One of the things that came from our discussions, your discussions very early on was, we obviously were not going to be able to flood-proof Lee County. Impossible based on the topography of the state that we live in and the low spots that happen to be, and more specifically, one of the areas that were critically impacted by this was the Island Park area and the 10-mile canal area. So obviously, that's something that probably not going to be able to do. But at the end of the day, I think the question is, what are we going to do? How can we do this, and what have we done? This board gave us obviously clear direction. We've done a lot of work. We went through the phase 1 study, we went through the phase 2 study. We've also done a lot of maintenance. We had a maintenance program prior to Irma and Invest, but we enhanced that program following the storm. And as you go through the program today, you'll see a number of rain events and how the system works now. We're also going to talk about some we're going to get into the conceptual ideas and hopefully come back and be able to take those conceptual ideas or projects, cook them up a little bit better, and bring them back to you on a prioritization. But we'll discuss that as we go forward. One thing to know is what flooded during Hurricane Irma and Invest. It was those homes that were built prior to '92. And not every home, but those homes that were in those low-lying areas in the county, much like Island Park and Bonita Springs. It was those homes that were built prior to '92. And if you're going to ask, does this study and some of the conceptual ideas that we have coming from this study, is that going to alleviate the flooding for those homes specifically that were built prior to '92? And the answer would be no. It would be impossible to do that just based on the fact of the low-lying areas that they fall in. But what the goal is to mitigate, is to find ways to have the water level, to limit the water levels, the rise, and the duration of the water level. So that would be the goal of some of the projects and the conceptual ideas that we're going to present today. Just really quickly, I'd like to go over a little bit of the history of flooding in Lee County. Where the orange bar is to your left, that's about a 40-year period of flooding, major flooding events that happened in Lee County. As you can see, in 1977, we had 4.24 inches. And this is what the Island Park looked like in that at that time frame. And the reason I keep referencing Island Park, well, that was the area that was most impacted for unincorporated Lee County, and it's just a reference point throughout the presentation because we had specifically 31 inches of rain in this area along 10 Mile Canal. As you can see, in 92 we had 11 inches of rain, and that was specifically more in the south or the southern portion of Lee County. Same thing again in 95, we had almost 13 inches of rain. Again, the flooding was a little more localized. It was more in the south, a specific area in the south. We put 2004 on the graph as well because that was Hurricane Charlie. A lot of people were confused that there was a lot of rain during that event. It was mainly a fast-moving debris event. But then we hit 2017, and that's where you see 31 inches of rain that happened on two events. And what you're faced with during, not only did you have 31 inches of rain within a 20-day period, but you also had a very, very heavy rainy season. So you're coming out of rainy season and you dump another 31 inches. There was no place for the water to go. And then as you look to the right, we put another number of bar graphs that show a number of rain events that happened since Hurricane Irma. And including, we didn't put it up here, but also we will talk a little bit about Lehigh yesterday, who received about 6.5 inches of rain yesterday. Again, what you saw, and mainly what you see, is you'll see some roads, some swales, some backyards possibly flooded, but no homes have been flooded. What does that tell you? That tells you, if you look back to 1977, you can tell that a lot of work has taken place regarding water, holding water, and flooding. More specifically, you can see that the system as it's designed now for a normal rainy event works. So what the board has implemented and through your direction works. Through DOT and natural resources and the continued effort that they have, that system can hold, as you can see, even in May and June, it could hold almost 7 inches of rain, and we didn't have any homes flood, unlike 1977. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Roland so he can go ahead and get into the conceptual projects and a little more of the history of some of the things we've done. So, Roland?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you, Dave. Agenda today is a brief overview of the flooding in Lee County, specifically to Invest 92L and Hurricane Irma, look at our three-phase response. Then we'll jump into the Lee County Flood Mitigation Plan, which is our third phase, some of the goals and scope of work involved there, as well as get into a little bit about the analysis and project development as part of that work, and then address a couple of the other plan benefits and tasks that were completed, and then we'll go into next steps. But before we begin, a few recommendations I'd like to suggest is, and we'll come back to this at the end of the presentation, is one, do you concur with our recommendations to one, develop criteria to prioritize projects, two is to develop details on specific projects, and three, to bring back a list of prioritized projects similar to what DOT does for their road projects and the tiered schedule approach. So these two storms, Invest 92L and Irma, occurred in 2017. Invest 92L was a tropical disturbance that occurred around late August. August 25th was the largest rainfall portion of it. Then September 10th, I think, was the highest rainfall for Hurricane Irma, along with Category 2 winds, which didn't help conditions. So depending on where you're at in Lee County, you could receive 15 to 30 inches of rainfall in that 20-day time span. So this triggered a three-phase response. Our first phase was that initial clearing of the flow obstructions. That's basically that first push like we do with roads. You've got to remove the debris from waterways that were causing immediate flooding. Then we went on to phase two, which was our detailed flood assessments and the continuing remedial work, which we're continuing to this day. And then today's presentation, the focus is on the phase three. That's our long-term plan. Just a recap of the rain events. This is a rainfall map of the Invest 92L. The hotter colors, the more rainfall, and you can see the majority of the rainfall occurred on the western part of the county. Depending on where you were, Hendry County, the eastern part was around 4 inches of rain, up towards to 15 inches of rainfall along our inland coast. And then further out, offshore is very high. Then you go to Hurricane Irma. If you recall, that had landfall in Marco and basically followed the I-75 road corridor. And true to form, the highest rainfall was in that northeast quadrant. So, Hendry County was receiving upwards of 19 inches, 10 inches in Lee County, and then to the western part of Lee County was about 4 inches of rainfall. But when you combine these two storms, the dark red here shows areas that received over 28 inches of rainfall. That's a once-in-a-thousand-year storm event when you go to NOAA records, once-in-a-thousand-year occurrence. Or similarly, what we had, some areas actually had back-to-back 100-year storm events. So we didn't have, Invest 92 wasn't fully recovered before we actually had Irma come along.
Roland, for just a moment, Commissioners, in the whole thing being exacerbated by the sheet flow that comes out of Charlotte County. We don't talk about that here today, I don't think, but historically, when Charlotte County gets these heavy rains, just that are very similar to we get from time to time, within a 10-day period, all that sheet flow is coming from north to south, and it just makes all of our conditions just that much worse, particularly in North Fort Myers.
Roland?
Sir.
One question. Just as a point of reference, was this before 7 inches of rain? If we had 7 inches of rain during, say, an average year, we can absorb that, or we can deal with that?
In terms of flooding of homes, yes. I mean, in terms of, not per year, it would be like 7 inches for a storm event, because we actually get probably nearly 55 inches of rainfall.
We've got some big numbers up here. I'm
the
just
year.
trying to match up, with some parameters. Okay, thank you.
So when it rains, where does the water move? This map depicts all the flowways and water courses. The dark blue is basically all those creeks and streams and sloughs and features that deliver water. The shaded areas are the drainage areas that contribute to each one of those water courses. So if we drill down to a specific area here, this black star is basically where 6 Mile Cypress Slough and 10 Mile Canal meet. So the vertical line above that black star is the 10 Mile Canal. You see that red flow arrow moving south, and that moves south through to the Island Park area. The green shaded area to the right of that is the 10 Mile Canal watershed. To the right of that yet is the dark blue, that's the 6 Mile Cypress Slough, and the light blue pale area is the watershed area that drains to it, along with the LECO area and the airport area in the yellow. That all combines into 10 Mile Canal, makes its way to our 10 Mile Canal and on out to Mula Creek. And I'm going to come back to that star in a little bit. Lee County has a water control structure. They operate at that location, and I'll show you some information on that later. So just a reminder, these storms, the flooding was widespread. Bonita Springs, that was near Quinn Street. Orange River at the Caloosahatchee, that's just a reminder that we did have storm surge during this event. So Orange River couldn't deliver water out of the Lehigh community until the Caloosahatchee storm surge kind of moved, dropped down somewhat. Lehigh Acres flooded, as well as Island Park Road, as you're all familiar with. And this is that structure I talked about, that star location, or just south of that. This is a water control structure. We call it a weir. The left-hand side is just what it looks like prior to the rainy season. These are put in place because we want to conserve water. It holds and recharges our aquifers. But DOT has gates on here that they can operate to lower the pool behind it to provide a little cushion, a little storage in before the storm occurs. And then on the right-hand side is when you have a large event, it's actually come out of the banks. And it's as if that dam is not even there any longer. If you see that the water levels, the elevation is the same on both sides of that structure, you know that it's something downstream has met its capacity. That's what's controlling the water level in that canal in that area. So phase one was the initial clearing and pulling out debris. We saw a lot of this, especially in Orange River. Phase two was the detailed assessment. We had consultants come in and document all the flow obstructions, observations. We were also able to rely on citizen surveys. They provide a lot of valuable information, water levels in their yards, photographs. It was great information to have. And then DOT has this preventive maintenance program that really helps out a lot in terms of the movement of water. Besides their regular program, they went back in and went into the villas and also Island Park Road and regraded a lot of their ditches, but they do this on county-wide. Then we did a lot of work on East Mule Lake Water Control District. That's basically San Carlos Park. We did a lot of clearing of the flowways in that area, as this shows. Their water control structure at US 41 was damaged during Invest 92L, and we had that repaired, actually replaced. Then we dredged a couple locations in 10 Mile Canal, one just south of US 41, the other where 10 Mile meets Mule Creek. We are limited to only these two locations based on just material that was deposited due to Irma. That was only permitted. We were only permitted to go to those points. And this is the network of work that DOT and Natural Resources does. The blue lines are DOT's canal network that they've maintained since that period of time, and they do it on an annualized basis. And then also Natural Resources in the orange, the cleaning and snagging of natural creeks. Then more recently, back in October 2018, we entered an agreement with South Florida Water Management District. They took over 13 waterways. The ones they've completed since that time is in the dark, or in the black, rather. So to date, since 2017, these 3 phases, we've committed over $24 million towards this effort. About half of that's grant funds.
From when to when?
Since 2007, since that phase 1 push. Irma, yes, sir. Yeah. This includes grant funds and work that we're about ready to receive from CDBG. That's another $7 million. And this I does not believe this covers the amount of work that DOT does in terms of their work orders and work that they've already funded through their budget. So phase 3, the emphasis of today's presentation is the long-term plan. Its goal is to establish plans to reduce flooding on a larger regional scale. We're examining basically conceptual type projects. We also evaluated current flood protection regulations and coordinating those findings with South Florida Water Management District. We also examined the future build-out conditions to see how well these projects function. And all this was a major collaboration with South Florida Water Management District, the water control districts like Lampsid, the cities, and we also met with Collier County several times as well. When you embark on a large study like this, a regional study like this, it's important to have reasonable expectations and establish priorities, realizing that our area is subject to major tropical activity. We'll get rain events like this, and Invest 92 and Irma were extraordinary events beyond basically design standards. Overall, our land grade is very flat. We get maybe a foot drop in a mile in many cases in Lee County, so we don't have very much gravity to move water. Historic flow patterns relied on large expanses of floodplain, as Roger mentioned, sheet flow, and then that also moves into creeks and streams that have been encroached over time. And tide and storm surge also affects our ability to drain. If you have a major storm set up from a hurricane, all bets are off. That water's not going to move until that storm surge passes by. Then the realization that we cannot, as Dave mentioned, flood-proof all property. So our priorities with this effort were to focus on mitigating a flood intrusion to the homes and also provide safe passage of our evacuation routes and our collector roads. This graph just shows kind of the design levels for flood protection that are involved in the community. House pads are typically built at the 100-year flood event or above, and that's usually dictated by FEMA, either through their coastal storm surge maps, the risk maps, or their riverine calculations. And so house pads are built to that standard, and they're required for their insurance. And then also the 25-year event, which is below that, that's what South Florida Water Management District permits your subdivision for, that a builder has to demonstrate that they're holding water to pre-development conditions. And so they make sure the infrastructure is built to handle the 25-year storm. Then the 5-year, which is basically your internal roads or your land in your community, you can expect some flooding after a 5-year storm event, much like what we had in Lehigh, in certain parts of Lehigh just the last couple of days.
There just long enough for me to understand your reference 20 minutes ago to 1,000-year, but that was 10 days. That wasn't a single event.
That's correct, sir.
How does I want that 1,000-year to relate to what I'm looking at here, the 100-year?
Yeah, it'd be above that line, but it was, this is not the scale graphic, so it's still going to be above that. In other words, we had 2 100-year events, which didn't fully recover. And why I say 1,000-year, that's based on NOAA database. They have all the data of rainfall records at Page Field and throughout the state, and they determine the recurrence, the likelihood of that storm event occurring again is once in 1,000 years with 30 or 28 inches of rainfall over a 20-day time span.
20-day time.
20 times.
That was the 2 storms combined.
Sir, this isn't time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He thought he was helping, but
Yeah.
it is a 20-day period that the 1,000 years
Yeah.
calculated
Just for your reference, a 100-year event, a 3-day 100-year event is 14.5 inches of rainfall. So in 3 days, if you got 14.5 inches of rainfall, that would be a 100-year storm event. But we had back-to-back. That's why the recurrence interval is so high. The likelihood of that occurring is so
Commissioners, one of the largely misunderstood concepts when we talk about 100-year event, 25-year event, or a 1,000-year event is that if it happens today, it won't happen again for another 1,000 years. When in fact it's a statistic.
Tomorrow.
It's a statistical probability. Yes, it could happen tomorrow, but based on historical records, that becomes the statistical probability. That 20-day period and that 30 inches of rain or so, that was on top of an already pretty heavy rainy season. The ground was super saturated, so for that water to percolate was going to be very, very slow, given the topography of Florida, Lee County in particular. As Roland says, it's about a foot drop for every mile that you travel to the southwest of Lee County. Drop that much rain in the areas where we receive them, and that if we wanted to make that graphic a little more to scale, in that 100-year, that line would be above the sort of the middle of the windows on the second floor of that house, and that was the experience.
Well, what I'm not understanding, Mr. Chairman, is do we have within our development of priorities, which is you're headed for today, to say, okay, you want us to keep refining priorities? Do we have built into whatever we're doing now a goal of saying, let's try to make Lee County safe from a 25-year flood? Or what is today's goal? How do we know when we've done as much as we need to do, or someday we're going to try to be ready for the 100-year storm, which might come every 22 years? Or what is our goal? Is there anything implied in looking at this? What do I know now based on what our internal goals and previously adopted policies? How does that relate to a 100-year level that I'm looking at there that could flood every pond and estuary in the county?
Well, and the scope of our work, our priority was to prioritize bringing that 100-year-old event down to reduce the amount of homes that were flooded, realizing that those that are built prior to the current regulations, they're in a floodplain. There may not be any exercise or conceptual project that may help those. The best perhaps is to rise those or remove them out of the floodplain. But the idea is there's no set formula for the entire county because it's a unique situation. So there's trade-offs in terms of project costs, the benefits achieved, and what we can realistically do with in terms of the lands we have, and also incorporating private properties. And we'll get into some of that analysis later on to this presentation. But again, our priority was to reduce water levels, flood levels, to a manageable level.
Commissioner, I know this is the question you've asked is really difficult to answer. Given the current development standards for new developments, for example, these developments are required to store all of the water from a storm up to how many year storm?
Well, they have to be of the 100-year storm, above the 100-year storm. They're not necessarily storing it, but they at least have to be. And so the newer developments are probably safe. I mean, they're likely.
Can I just to clarify, and because I want to understand this one too. So what we're looking at here, this graphic says design levels, flood protection. So this is what communities that are built or being built today, this is how they're designed by engineers to work.
Yes.
So if we get a rain that's big enough that statistically you would only see this much rain every 5 years, so it's a big rain event, maybe that comes around once every 5 years, you're going to see enough flooding to cover your roadways, but it'll stay mostly out of your yard. And then, if I'm reading this correctly, you're saying if we get enough rain that comes around maybe once every 25 years, it's a really big storm, then it's going to get kind of midway up your yard, closer to your house. It'll cover the roads, maybe encroach upon your yard. But if we have our design standard, the lots that your house is being built on right now, your house is built up high enough right now today that the chances of water getting into your home should only be once every 100 years, statistically speaking?
Yes, I mean, that's kind of what we experienced, too. The homes that flooded during most of these events were built prior to 92, which was before the most recent or the current FEMA regulations in terms of house pads. So, we have, criteria in place to keep them up out of the water. But if you have a 1,000-year event, statistically, they could possibly flood again like this. So
Right. So if you had so the event that we had, which like you said, statistically only would happen once every 1,000 years, it's going to get into the houses, but there's really no way to kind of build around that. Okay, so talk to me about that, because I think a lot of people notice the roads flooding, and that certainly it's not convenient. I mean, you can't get in and out of your community. You're worried about whether you're going to damage your vehicle. But what you're saying is the engineers designed it that way so that the roads flood, but not the houses?
internal, yeah, a lot of the internal. I mean, county roads are obviously built to different standards as well, but internal for a subdivision. Some cases they use their open space for storage of water, part of their calculations, or golf courses. They use those fairways to store water because that's part of their design.
And do they have a goal to get those roads drained or cleared? I mean, so if they are going to flood, I mean, do they have to drain within a certain amount of time?
Not necessarily a certain amount of time, but that's part of the system. It draws it down as the rainfalls move on. The system pulls it out of your subdivision. So the idea is to make sure it's not sitting around for day upon day upon day, unless you start getting back to back, like we do sometimes in the summertime. You can get successive storm events right after each other.
That will build on top of each other. Yeah, I thought the slide you had right before this one was eye-opening too, that talked about expectations, because it is interesting. I mean, I almost think sometimes we need an owner's manual to know how to deal with the weather that we get here. But so we should all understand that there are certain expectations that if we see major tropical activity, because we live at such a very flat, almost near sea level grade, we're going to see flooding. Potentially, but we've designed it on the next slide in ways that the flooding would happen in the roads first, your yard second, and your house would be the last thing to get any water in it. Okay, I think that makes some sense.
Yeah, it's a difference between nuisance type flooding versus something that's really, property damage.
Mr. Chairman, just let me say thank you, because you're thinking exactly like I am, that in terms of goals, what is it we're trying to. And he started using the level at which houses flood that we're trying to avoid. But we built a bunch of them for years down here. But if you go to Lehigh, for instance, today, and you see every third house is built up 5 feet, 3 to 5 feet, some amount, those won't flood, but these will. But if you watch the TV last night at 6 o'clock, after 7 inches of rain, give or take, around the county, they're standing looking down the streets, and the streets are flooded, and they're interviewing the neighbor who's saying the county should do something about this. All right, here we are, county. What are we responding to, and just what is our goal? Because financially, we can't avoid that street flooding with 5,000 miles of roads in Lee County, 1,500 in Lehigh alone. There's great expectations being created on the 6 o'clock news, with all due respect and love. But they're interviewing the neighbor, and the neighbor is saying the county should do something. That was last night, and I won't say which station, because I think probably all three of them were saying the same thing. So then how do we, that's what the public's saying out there, and then what are our goals here? What are you leading up to? I want to just keep it relevant to
Commissioner, I think I can
people we serve.
help with that a little bit. Again, it goes back to topography. Obviously, we're low-lying. I think the goal would be we'll never get away from potentially the roads flooding for a short period of time. I think the goal for this study and this plan and these conceptual ideas that we're going to bring back is to limit the level of flooding and the duration of flooding, so that it will dissipate rather quickly, collectively, with all these projects we're talking about. But I think that's the ultimate goal, to get rid of standing water in the roadway probably never going to happen, but the goal would be to limit that duration and the flood levels.
Well, my chairman spoke brilliance just a minute ago when you said this is a flat county and it's a low county. It's not full of hills and mountains where the rain runs off immediately. It sits there and it's a long time running off. And there's nothing we can do to stop that street flooding that you're seeing that makes any kind of sense. It's just beyond our financial capability and the taxpayers' ability to guard against that. So I don't know if somewhere I'd like to put it right up here at the Charlotte County line. It says, warning, flooding, if you're planning to buy something around here. Because
Well, you know, that is something we could talk about. I don't know what, maybe our brilliant county attorney could give us the guidance on it at some point. But, you know, you're right. Could you talk about a real estate disclosure or something that when you buy a property here that it doesn't have to be anything but other than just a disclosure? Hey, flooding could be possible in Lee County or something like that. You're buying property in an area that's flat, that used to be a swamp, that may potentially flood.
And since we have streets and a government and canals and discharges, we are creating expectation of water safety.
Yeah.
Yet we know, sitting here, being honest with each other, that depending on how much rain you give us, certain areas are going to flood. And what we committed to 3 years ago after the hurricane was, how much can we do, and that's why we're here, to mitigate that. So we know the areas that are really flooded bad, how can we keep that from happening again? And that's where we're headed, but just how far are we headed?
Commissioner, probably the easiest way to say it is our goal is to do enough projects over the next several years to avoid catastrophic flooding.
Yeah.
Well, who could be against that?
Right?
That's well put.
So a big part of this was the analysis and project development. We divvied the county up into 4 regions: East Lee County, Southeast Lee County, South Fort Myers, Whiskey Creek. Now the area in bold line there up in North Fort Myers, that study was done in 2010, so a lot of the findings there are still valid today. We've been doing a lot of work in North Fort Myers, and anything that we still have left in that report, we will dovetail on our overall flood mitigation strategy, so it's not that they're left out. This analysis, however, generated a very complex hydrological model, and we basically broke the county into 750-foot by 750-foot grid, so that's a lot of points for the whole county, and established that upper right corner is your basically backbone drainage system. And so what this model does is computer simulation. It shows that when a rainfall comes across, what's the land response to it? How high does the water get and for how long? So it's very complex. You're adding all kinds of information, bathymetry, soil types, land use, all kinds of information goes into that, along with information we collected from the field, surveys from citizens. All that's put into the model to calibrate. So you have a model that says, hey, if I put in a storm like this is what the results will be like in terms of the water levels. And we were able to generate basically an existing conditions model that predicts what's occurring today. And the beauty of that becomes a nice tool that you can put in conceptual projects. So you run a conceptual project through it, and it will show you if the water levels were indeed dropped or if the durations were shortened. So it's kind of a useful tool to evaluate projects. And the types of projects we're looking at is storage type projects where you're holding back and storing water on your property and releasing it at a rate that matches the downstream capacity. Or looking at conveyance improvements where maybe you're going to widen a channel or deepen a channel or ditch. Or bypass, where maybe you have an area that once it's out of a bank, it has another alternative route to go to its final destination. Or it could be as simple as structure replacement. The culverts under this road are just too small at this crossing. We need to add some more. So it could be that simple. And so we evaluate these projects individually as well as a system, because you don't want to just fix one area. You might transfer a problem downstream. So you have to look at the entire system. And we looked at 38 different conceptual projects. Just idea in the graphics here what that we're talking about. This is a shallow flowway example. If you look at the lower right there, this obviously was an area that was preserved for wetlands and the natural flow, but perhaps it doesn't handle the 100-year storm event. So is there some uplands available to the side of that? You could actually excavate a shallow swale there, like this picture on the left-hand side, still environmentally beneficial and provides flood capacity. Or this, the bypass concept, where you have the natural meander of a stream, and when it goes out of bank, it's flooding homes and yards. You may be able to build some kind of a bench cut so you can kind of control where the water goes once it reaches a certain level. And so I'll just go briefly into each one of those areas and some of the projects we're looking at. This is East Lee County. It's bounded to the south by 82 and to the north by the Caloosahatchee, to the east, Hendry County. Developed 11 different projects. This area depends on natural creeks and streams for flow. Orange River, Bedman Creek, and Hickey Creek. Involves primarily the communities of Lehigh Acres and Buckingham. And the flooding we saw there is primarily bank flow out of the floodplain. So we're looking at the bypass concept, storage concept, enhanced conveyances, those types of projects. And the idea was to remove basically 3 inches of rainfall per day to bring the water levels down to normal conditions. So example of this is one that's underway already. Lamset is moving forward with this project. This study reconfirmed the benefits of it. In this case, they own this piece of land here in the crosshatch, and basically the canal in the center there, Dog Canal, was over capacity. It had some struggles there, but Hendry County had some additional capacity. So the idea here is to connect the two, but also providing that basin there, that land, they can also provide as some sort of storage reservoir to store water. And they're also adding a water quality feature. You see that light blue meandering water course there. So they're moving forward. This is a good project, and it's kind of a multi-benefit type of project. Speaking of multi-benefits, this is the GS10 parcel we purchased through 2020. It's a whole section of land. You know, we initially focused a lot on the water quality benefits, but it too can provide storage for flood attenuation, because we're going to be connecting those canals nearby, putting that water into this system, and then slowly releasing it to Greenbrier Swamp. Again, this provides multiple benefits, including water quality, but also flood attenuation. Then moving on to Whiskey Creek area, 3 canals there. This area drains to Caloosahatchee via an old IDD canal network, drainage district. It's a 5,760-acre watershed, involves the community of Whiskey Creek, the villas, pretty much built out with residential, light commercial. We're looking at conveyance improvements, designing this storm system for the 25-year storm event, and then evaluate those benefits, see what happens during the 100-year storm event. So this one, you just approved the design the other day. This is that Canal H7, where we're improving the channel, improving the connection through FSW campus, and then where it ultimately discharges to the south end of Whiskey Creek. And the graph to the right there, it's pretty simple. It's just water levels in 2 different locations. Basically, the blue line shows the water level prior to the project being put in place, and the orange is if you put the project in place. In both cases, we're dropping the flood levels about 1.5 feet. This is for the 100-year storm event. Moving on to South Lee County area, very large watershed, some 16 projects we evaluated. This drains Estero Bay via the Estero River, Halfway Creek, Spring Creek, Imperial River, Oak Creek. There's a 200 square mile watershed, so it's very large. Moves all the way from 82 east to Lake Trafford, all the way down to Bonita Springs, so it's a large watershed. Involves the village of Estero, City of Bonita Springs, FGCU campus, and Corkscrew Road and Alaco Road corridors, US 41 and I-75 all play a big part in drainage in that area. We're looking at flow bypass, storage, conveyance improvements. We're also designing a system for the 25-year, but evaluating also the benefits for the 100-year storm event as well. So this is a shot of Larry Kiker Preserve. Now, if you combine this land with the crew lands, there's an opportunity to provide additional storage in the region. The historic flow patterns in this area, basically due to the development west of I-75, basically limited the amount of water that could go west and shunted a lot of water south to the Bonita Springs area. The idea here is if you could build a perimeter berm along the Kiker Preserve all the way down to the Kiel Canal encompassing the crew lands, You can provide some temporary storage and control or release that water to the Kiel Canal or to creeks west of I-75 at a control rate that they can handle. And if you strategically locate this berm, you could also potentially help the hydro periods and those wetlands out there. So it's a conceptual idea, but I think it's got a lot of promise. We'll have to iron out some of the details. Then the South Fort Myers area, this drains the Estero Bay via Hendry Creek, 10-mile canal, Mulock Creek. It's an 89-square-mile watershed. We're also looking at flow bypass, storage, and conveyance improvements in this area as well, designed for the 25-year event and evaluated for the 100-year storm event. And this is a blow-up of the 10-mile canal area. The blue dashed line, the vertical line in the center of the photograph on the left is 10-mile canal. We're looking at replacing some the berm on the west bank that's been breached over the years, doing some select dredging. And then you'll see some horizontal lines off of that, the light pale blue that goes to the left or the west. They go to Hendry Creek. Those are old IDD canals as well. And there's an opportunity to connect those to 10-mile canal with control, telemetry, and gated structures to perhaps move some of the water off the top end of 10-mile canal before it gets down to Island Park. So again, these all are conceptual in nature at this stage. We also looked at enhanced maintenance. Depending on which creek and stream you're looking at, you could realize 0 to 3 feet of water level drop by enhancing the frequency of maintenance. However, realize that many of them are natural creeks, so we just can't go on clear cut. We need to preserve the natural function of those creeks as well. Just some of the other plan event benefits. The projects achieve the desired level of service for the 2040 land use, future land use conditions. The analysis also provided recommended stormwater criteria for South Florida Water Management District permitting. Plan also provides community rating systems credits eligible for reduction in flood insurance premiums. And it's also a useful tool for property owners and their engineers and planners in designing and permitting their own projects. They have been using them already. So even though the project's not complete, it's a 1,200-page report. We're finalizing the details, editing, but it has been underway. We've been using early results for, we used it for the crossing of Corkscrew Road widening. We entered a flowway agreement with Verdana Village in the place, and it's a great example of a public-private partnership that you can get things done. Then we have a whole host of grant applications we put in place and planning efforts to move forward with this project or this plan. So here we are. This is basically the last couple slides here. Is we've got these conceptual projects. Staff would like to go back and further assess these challenges. You know, what land is availability. A lot of them involve private property, so there would be a challenge there. Some have more environmental impacts than others, and what will be the mitigation requirements. And just look at the overall cost effectiveness of some of these. So our recommendation today here is to establish a criteria and prioritization similar to what DOT does for their road tiers. Once we have that, we can get in and refine the projects, optimize the projects, perhaps look at alternatives analysis, levels of service, and then generate a capital improvement program for your approval, and then move on to design, permit, and construct. So coming back to our recommendations, do you concur with the recommendation to 1, develop criteria to prioritize these projects, develop details on specific projects, and then bring back a list of prioritized projects similar to what DOT does with the road projects in the tier scenario?
You know, Roland, listening to you talk, one of the thoughts that crossed my mind, I love the analogy to our Department of Transportation 5-year capital improvement plan. I think that's something that all of us are familiar with. We've been through that planning process. But another analogy here that I was thinking about, you made me think of the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. When you talked about we've got 38 conceptual projects that would help us achieve the level of service that we want to when it comes to flooding. You know, that sounds a lot like SERP to me, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. So my thought is that's basically what you're asking here is, could you take these 38 projects and prioritize them, put them into the integrated delivery schedule, if you will, and then we work on getting them funded and built and make an incremental difference with each one that comes online.
My work here is finished.
Yeah. There you go. That sounds good.
No, good job.
Well, thanks. I mean, to me, that makes sense. Realistically, do you have, did the study provide us with any kind of ballpark estimate for how much all 38 projects might cost, or how long it would take to build them, or?
Yeah, yes, upwards of $700 million. So, but like I said, we have to go through a lot of the analysis, refinement, alternatives analysis. What's your trade-off for level of service versus the improvements you put in place?
So Commissioner Hammond, I think you did a really good job of summing the whole thing up. I mean, that really is the the right way to view all of this. We're at that stage now where if we can develop some criteria for you to consider so that we can prioritize these projects, then we can do a better job of putting cost and schedule to all of it, over this coming year. In the meantime, we still have, you saw some of the projects early in the presentation that are underway. We've got plenty of work to do to continue improving the existing system, but to go beyond, the current capital project plan. It requires a little more of a planning effort by, which starts with creating the criteria that, if you were all okay with, we can then, prioritize some of these projects and put the cost and schedule to it.
But you brought us in the world of reality here when you forced, who did you say 700 million or he say, who said 700
Roland,
million?
I would never say a number that big.
Well, that's our entire annual budget and 50% more that we would have to devote only to flood control.
Commissioners, a couple of years ago, we were having a conversation and we talked about, this is $1 billion, with projects. When you consider time value of money in a few years from now, sure, 750 today, but 10 years from now, we're at $1 billion easily. Thank you.
Well, I'm just trying to get my arm around the first 700 million.
Yep.
We'll worry about the other 300 later. But that's, you're right on target. I mean, to make this relevant for me, it's then, okay, what do you want to do in terms of priorities and projects to adopt, and how far can we go, and what are we going to try to carve out that we can manage with the budget that we've got? And I'm not anywhere, we're 700 million, it's just so far away. But for this commission, year 2020, what we can realistically handle needs to be part of a long-term goal of, at some point, we can tell the people that move here that they're not going to flood. And the road that you're on is not going to flood. But I'm looking at little things like your number 37 and 35 or 7, both made reference to designing for the 25-year event, where that's not 50 or 100 or leave alone 1,000, but that's the numbers that you're working with. That's what you're suggesting we could attack or try to and design for a 25-year event.
Yeah, and it's not to say
And that's the South County alone.
Right, you're basically designing so during a 25-year event, the water stays within the banks of the conveyance that you're moving the water. But that's not to say you're not achieving benefits for the 100-year storm event by that same system. So we're able to calculate the reductions we are having expanding that channel to a 25-year event capacity. It still provides benefit no matter what storm you have that comes along our way. There will be benefit from it. So you want to see what the results are. These are conceptual projects that they ran through. 38 of them. There's still going to be some level of refinement and looking at trade-offs in terms of level of service protection and capital improvements that need to be done.
One last, and I'll try to make this my last. If I went over to Dave Loveland's shop and I wanted to pull a permit to build a new house anywhere in Lee County, can I be assured that they're not going to issue me a permit unless that house is built up to some level that will not flood?
Yes. Yes.
Well,
I mean, it's not.
Chairman, I don't necessarily think the standard is will not flood. There's a certain standard that we would permit to, and I believe that's the 25-year flood event. as we've seen, that's not a guarantee that it will not flood at some point based on specific conditions, just as we experienced in 2017. But yes, we have established a floodplain ordinance here in Lee County, and all new construction has to be built to that minimum flood elevation. But it's not a guarantee against all flooding under all circumstances.
I would, look, if my lawyer had answered that question, had not thrown in that disclaimer that it's not a guarantee, we do the best we can, but you never know what a court's going to say, I would have been crushed, but I understand. But essentially, we are building, we're issuing permits that make sense.
Right.
And the likelihood is there's less chance of that one flooding when we get 7 inches tomorrow and 7 inches the next day and the next day.
Chairman, if I might just follow up, because I always like to end with Commissioner Mann and I in solid agreement. I think what 2017 showed us was those subdivisions that designed to the newer standards, by and large, did not flood. It was the pre-92 development before the standards were in place that flooded. So yes, in this case, it would not necessarily be a court of law, it would be a court of the good Lord and what he sends us.
Well, my guess is the TV shows that I was watching at 6 yesterday afternoon were probably of those parts of Lehigh. I'm almost certain they were, that were built in the 92 standards.
Oh, really?
And again, it was roads flooding. It was not the houses, because this house may, but the next one that was built with those standards, it will not. But I'm getting some comfort, I think I understand from your answer, that the likelihood of any house being built today and flooding, and for that matter, I presume commercial construction is the same way, they're much better off today than they were in the history of this county.
Yeah, no. Commissioner Sandelli?
Just a couple of thoughts. It's a lot to absorb, no pun intended. But at some point,
That was really good.
I like that.
you can use it. I assume as we go through this process, we're going to have, as we do with roads, some sense of priorities of what the flooding is, where it's worse, and how we address that. And obviously, we have done that with homes being built now at an elevation that keeps them from flooding. I turn to Randy all the time because roads fascinating me, trying to keep roads meet the demand we have. But is road construction changing at all? Because the first element when it rains, it's going to be on the road. So is road construction changing at all to be able to hold water differently, to disperse water differently? Because that's really the first part of where it's almost like canals, you know. And I live in Bonita, and Irma, Bonita Beach Road was impassable. You know, I was cutting through around Home Depot and so on just to get out to someplace. And so I'd like to see those priorities established, but also as we put new roads in, are they any different?
Roadway elevations, we set, it's not by accident. We go out there, like with this new illegal extension we're going to build, we're going to ask South Florida and some other agencies, what is the elevation to build at? Then we'll get with Roland, because we're going to probably lift that existing area up there probably this high, so the road does not flood. That one graph you show where it has a 5-year flood at the top there at the road, technically that's not true. Water is sitting hopefully very low in the ditch at the 5-year floods when you're up by the road. So we really don't want that to happen even in a 5-year flood. So then we'll get with Roland's group to see what the flow is under the road and put enough box culvert and enough pipe to move the flow, yet keep the roadway up high. So that wasn't done in the old days here. The pictures in the paper yesterday were from Buckingham Airport. That's not a county maintained roadway. They have hardly any drainage. Or in some places in Lehigh, those Texas swales, that's part of the roadway. The folks said, look, there's water in the road. That has to be. That's part of the swale that we're trying to get rid of those over time and pipe those in and put the road up top. Commissioner, you know what those Texas swales are. You drive through them, or that's what a couple were flooded yesterday. So the roadways fairly well yesterday. The problem with the water in roadway building is the intensity, how fast the rain comes down. If we could take 7, 8, 9 inches of rain over 3 days, it's 3, 4, 5 inches of rain in 1 hour that we can't take. We can't build anything to stop that. stop that flood. The good thing is, though, we'll be able to coordinate, if we get a list together with our DOT list and the tiers, we can coordinate those two and say, hey, you know, we're gonna build a legal extension now, what projects you have going up there, and build them together as we move forward. That's a good thing.
I think that's the thing that I'm trying to figure out as I go along here, is that how do we establish different priorities? How do we connect water movement to the road elevations, to home elevations, those type of things, so this stuff is all working together? And then how do we communicate that? It was very unnerving to me, and I've lived in Florida for a lot of years, when you can't get from point A to B. You know, you start looking for alternatives and you start doing stupid stuff. So, okay, great, thank you.
You know, one thing I wanted to ask Roger, how do you envision the criteria and prioritization process going? What do you think you can do to help us establish those those criteria and those priorities? Because, you know, I think that's something the board's going to need to talk about. Do we want to do projects that tackle the road flooding first, or do we want to do projects that maybe tackle something different, more holistic? You know, do we want to do a big dollar project first, or do we want to do several small dollar projects first too? So how do you envision that process going?
Commissioners, I think the process would be very similar to what we did with the road priorities. We'll start with our technical staff so that we understand what, in the model that Roland described, you know, what area of Lee County floods under what conditions. And then we can start to establish a criteria that says, well, we can alleviate it in that part of the county, under that part of, under a certain set of conditions, and here are the projects that it would take in order to accomplish that goal. So we can then provide you with the priorities, so you can say, okay, well, we want to make sure that we are, every project that we do is going to be designed to help the system, not necessarily just one area, but the system, because it is, you know, we've talked about that before. And so, you know, the system, if you don't, at the very bottom of the system, if you don't start projects there, then it doesn't matter what you do at the top of the system, right? So the water has to convey at the bottom and then work its way up. So we will show you the criteria for decision-making to accomplish those goals. And then there'll be a number of policy decisions that are going to have to be made, not the least of which will be funding. So when we get to the end of this road, that will be the last thing we'll talk about, is money. Where's it going to come, you know, how much, where's it going to come from, timing.
All right. Anything else you guys want to, for the good of the order?
Back to page 5. Are we trying to answer that today?
Yes, sir. That's those really are recommendations, is for us to develop the criteria to prioritize the projects, and then after we do that, and you get a look at all that, we'll workshop that. Then we develop the details on specific projects, which we will then show you again, and then ultimately we bring back a list of the projects and some funding options.
Well, I'm a little confused on items 1 and 2, develop criteria to prioritize and develop the details. How do you develop the details until we've answered number 1, develop the priority projects?
And we do the number 1 first. These are sequential.
Do we already have a listing or something of where our, say, hot spots are? These are and we talk about Allen Park all the time. We have this list of 5 or 10 or a dozen, say these are critical. You know, so those have to be. And obviously, the other side of that is the new roadways that we put in that are designed for the future, you know, like you said. So it's like everything we do, it's a balance. How do you mitigate the worst? How do you plan for the best and going forward?
Mr. Chairman, we're back where you were a little while ago, leading us here, that not unlike that Chinese proverb of every great journey begins with a single step. We just got that $700 million. It's going to take a lot of single steps. And I think staff is making great sense that we have to do this in order to make the subsequent decisions and then put the dollars to them and see how far it stretches.
Yes, sir.
So I'm good with what they've produced here and suggest.
Good deal. Good deal. I'm good too. Commissioner Sandelli, you're You concur, Commissioner Manning?
Commissioner Manning?
Your last chance to object.
Don't want to like throw the grenade in the middle of the room and then walk away? No. You're good. All right. Well, very good. Mr. DeGilet, if that's it, then.
Commissioners, I think we have a marching orders. We know what to do next. And as soon as we can kind of formulate a schedule, we'll get that to you. And, we'll get back to work.
Very good. All right. Stay dry.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Commissioners.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
Roland, good job.